Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo 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 Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So we'll chant one invocation prayer. It's in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. If you don't have it yet, no problem. Those of you who know it can sing along, and those of you who don't, you'll learn it very soon. But it's a nice auspicious invocation prayer. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakambhitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Bhakta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Welcome everyone to the art of mind control. So today we'll discuss primarily from the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the title of the chapter is Dhyana Yoga. He's speaking about the Ashtanga Yoga process of connecting with the Lord. We'll discuss in a couple of weeks more about the yoga process and the science of yoga in all the different fields and what it ultimately concludes in. But in this 6th chapter, there's one central theme that Krishna is speaking about. It is about how to control the mind. And this art of mind control is not so easy. Srila Prabhupada says that when there is a pack of wolves, how can there expect to be peace? And so sometimes it feels like there's a lot of voices in our mind racing in so many directions. And so we're going to discuss today this art of mind control. And we're going to explain this illustration. But primarily, we're going to read from this. So everybody should have a handout that says The Art of Mind Control. And there's a reason there's no microphone today. Because we're going to have a discussion. So my participation in this is simply to facilitate. But we're going to have a conversation about the art of mind control. So we'll read this passage. It's about 6 paragraphs long. And then we'll start to discuss a few things. So anybody who would like to read the first paragraph, can read, and we'll just take turns. Whoever would like to read a paragraph. If you can read it loud enough for everyone to hear, that'd be great.
As we arrive into the 21st century, we see that science and technology has reached heights which could not have been imagined a few hundred years ago. The purpose of science is to either eliminate all miseries or at best reduce miseries and thereby bring more and more happiness in the lives of common people. So, we should expect the most cherished qualities of love, peace and fraternity amongst the citizens. However, the present day scenario is just the opposite. Second.
Yeah, someone else can read the next one.
If knowledge is power, what are we doing with all our knowledge? If we are unable to control the world situation today, one need not blame the government, politicians, bureaucrats, police officials, judiciary, etc. for the problems that the world faces today. We are internally disturbed, so we create disturbances for others. We have to evaluate the nature of our mind to understand the art of mind control.
Anything else?
The biggest problem is the identity crisis. Who am I? If one can identify one's real identity, he can work towards achieving lasting happiness. Actually, we are not these bodies, but pure spiritual souls. The body which we see is actually dead. It appears to be alive because of the presence of the soul. When the soul leaves the body becomes inactive. The soul is spiritual energy, covered by the material energy consisting of gross elements and subtle elements. The gross elements are earth, water, fire, air, either, and subtle elements, ether, and the subtle elements are mind, intelligence, and false ego.
False ego is the connection or bond between the material body and the soul. Intelligence is the decision maker. Mind is the center of all activities of the senses and is the reservoir of all ideas of sense enjoyment. It is a storehouse of thoughts, unfulfilled desires, and previous experiences. The function of the mind is thinking, feeling, and willing. The senses are the direct link with the external world. The overall arrangement of the whole soul-body arrangement can thus be fulfilled only if the senses are controlled. For example, when you are walking along the road and you see a pizza shop, first your eyes are attracted by the picture of the pizza. This information is passed on to the mind. The mind has two things: the previous experience of the taste of pizza and the input of seeing the pizza. The mind consults the intelligence, and the intelligence dictates to your hands and legs to go to the shop and purchase the pizza. In this way, coordination takes place between the senses, mind, and intelligence.
The nature of mind is like a jumping monkey, jumping from one branch to another, and it's never stable. The mind is not satisfied, satiated, no matter how many of its desires you try to fulfill. From stress to heart attack, from depression to suicide, from a petty quarrel to a bloody fight, the culprit behind all problems is an uncontrolled mind. An uncontrolled mind can completely ruin a person. However, a controlled mind can be your best friend.
So, how can we control the mind? There are many physical, mental, and spiritual techniques. Physical methods include yoga exercise, pranayama, breathing exercises, diet, celibacy, fasting, etc. Mental techniques include forgiveness, detachment, techniques to develop concentration, patience, self-control over impulses, positive thinning, and change of mental attitudes. Spiritual techniques include mantra meditation, developing realized knowledge about the self, associating with the spiritual-minded people, and spiritual diet. The spiritual techniques have been found to be all-inclusive and simply by following the spiritual principles. The benefits of all other methods, physical and mental, can be experienced.
There's no peace and happiness in accumulation of wealth or possessing bodily beauty or in display of strength. The real secret of happiness is in a controlled mind, which is gradually achieved with a spiritual way of life. It is very difficult to control the mind and senses without experiencing a high taste of spiritual bliss.
Okay. So lots of things to discuss here. We'll see how much we can cover today. If we get too in-depth, we can carry on a little bit more next week as well. Because this is a very pertinent topic, this art of mind control. So, what are some reasons why we want to control the mind? Or what are some experiences of what we see when we have an uncontrolled mind? What happens?
Get into trouble.
We get into trouble.
We want to control our actions, basically. That's why we want to control our mind. And
So the actions aren't controlled with an uncontrolled mind. Very nice. And we see that with crimes, things that we happen. We see that people... What are some other things we see with an uncontrolled mind? Or vice versa. What do you see when you see someone who has a very controlled mind?
They make the right choices,
They
right
make,
decisions.
they make good decisions,
Yeah.
good choices.
Get better health.
Better health. Yes. The mind is a center point sometimes of our whole experience of whether we are healthy or unhealthy.
Basically, when the mind is controlled, we are happy.
When the mind is controlled, we are happy. Okay?
Peaceful.
Peaceful.
And we realize our full potential, human potential.
We realize the full potential. Very nice. I like that one also.
Lets you be in the present moment.
It allows you to enjoy what you have, to be in the present. Right? The mind seems to always hanker for what I don't have versus enjoying what I have. Right? That's what the mind compares. Well, I have this nice TV, but the neighbor has a 70-inch TV. And so then the mind laments instead of appreciating what we have. Right? So in this way we see this. Right? So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says in the 6th verse, for him who has conquered the mind is best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind remains the greatest enemy. So the mind is neither friend nor enemy. It's depending on how we've utilized the mind. Right? So, now what is the mind? What is the mind? Maybe from something you read here, or maybe your own understanding. What is the mind? Let's define the mind.
It's a central control center for all our actions.
It's the central control center for all our actions, okay? I'd agree with that.
Intelligence.
Huh?
Intelligence.
So is mind separate from intelligence, or are they one and the same?
They work together.
They work together, but they're distinct. Right? Mind and intelligence are distinct. Anybody's had the experience that some idea comes in our mind, let's go and do some activity. And the intelligence says, no, you have a big project due tomorrow. And then the mind says, yeah, but we won't stay long at the party. And then the intelligence says, you said that last time and it didn't work. And then the mind says, yeah, but it's close by and we'll come home by midnight. And this conversation goes back and forth. Anybody's had that conversation? We all have. That's the mind and the intelligence. Right? So there are two distinct things. So what is the mind? We have heard central control center of all of our actions. What do we understand the mind to be?
Storage.
Collection of past thoughts.
Collection of
Past actions.
past thoughts and actions. Yes. So the mind is a giant database. It contains impressions, thoughts, experiences. If you think about everything we see, it's like a rapidly clicking camera which stores the image. Everything we hear stores little clips, sound blips. Everything we touch, we smell. It creates data and is stored in the mind. Right? It's stored in the mind. So the mind is a gigantic reservoir of our desires. And if you think about it, when you drive down the freeway and you see a big billboard, what is that billboard attempting to do?
Get your attention.
Get your attention. And how long is it hoping to grab your attention?
you see, like, you continue seeing.
Till you continue. It's trying to make an impression in the mind so that you'll remember, oh, I want that. Right? That's the goal of advertising. A good advertiser will make a lasting impression in the mind to create the desire for that thing or service, whatever they're promoting. That is the goal of marketing. So they're trying to access our mind. Right? So we have many things that are accessing our mind. Now, the question we see here is, why do we see that problems of the mind, well, let's ask for a question. Are problems of the mind increasing over the last 50 years or decreasing?
Increasing.
Exponentially. So I heard a lot of confidence, and then I heard exponentially. Yeah. And why do we say that? How do we see it?
Because we're completely bombarded by all kinds of things.
We're overwhelmed with so many things. Yeah. What else do we see that give us some indication that the mind is becoming less and less stable as time progresses?
Also because of technologies.
Bad things.
Technology, yeah.
Bad things in the outside world.
Bad things in the outside world.
My kid hooked to her phone all the time.
Our kids hooked to a phone all the time, right? I just saw a great cartoon. It was an image. 40 years ago, the mother's dragging the child into the house to come for dinner, and now the mother's dragging the child out of the house. Right? That's the mind. So we see, are psychiatrists busy today?
Super busy.
How big is the antidepressant drug industry? Sad. It's huge. It's gigantic, and it's growing. So we see that the difficulties of the mind are increasing, right? But we also know technology has increased. Different facilities have increased. Bandwidth has increased. TVs have increased in size. Homes have increased. Cars have gotten faster. Clothes have gotten more fancy. Sometimes less than it should be. But we see that things have so-called progressed in science, technology, wealth, facilities. So why don't we see the mind getting better as technology and all these things advance?
It's not valued.
It's not?
It's not valued.
It's not valued.
The mind is not being used to the extent it is supposed to be used. Everything is smart, so we don't have to apply brain power or anything.
So the mind is being underutilized by all the facilities we have around us.
Because of the convenience that everybody tries to find in everything, and that's what is being sold to everyone. Convenience and travel, convenience and managing your time. So I think it's making you use less and less of your mind, so that you're hooked onto something else that gives you a false sense of convenience, I think, because there is a long-term impact on all of these things.
Yeah, I like that. False sense of convenience. False sense of accomplishment. Some quick hits, but long-term losses. I mean, our minds have become so weak. Without this thing, we can't even remember somebody's phone number. You remember when we were children, you'd remember so many phone numbers. We can't even remember like our mother and father's phone number anymore. Right? Because we have this so-called convenience, but it's weakened our mind. Right? So what we can analyze, at least if we step back objectively, as technology has increased, as information has increased, as all the comforts of life have so far increased, the peace of mind hasn't increased. The mind hasn't increased. And someone said that without peace of mind, where is the scope for happiness? Can one be happy without a peaceful mind? Krishna says at the end of the 2nd chapter, in this very beautiful section that we'll study in several weeks, he says that without a peaceful mind, no one can be happy. And we have our own experience of that. Right? So in this example, the mind is jumping around like monkeys. We all have experiences of that. Right? So, accumulation of wealth, accumulation of fame, accumulation of beauty, accumulation of more things, is it going to bring us to a peaceful mind? No. And there's a specific reason for that. Anybody care to speak about why doesn't more money, let's just take wealth as an example, that's tend to be a common theme. Why doesn't more wealth lead to a more peaceful mind?
Because more wealth means more technology, and then you get lonely because you have these so-called friends on social media, but you don't talk to them in person.
Yeah, you create impersonal relationships with the use of your wealth.
Those are all external gratifications. It's not something internal. If you're not happy inside, you go live in a palace, you will not be happy.
So you can live in a gigantic mansion, right, and have all these wonderful features. But what do you need inside of that home?
Happiness.
You need love. Right? So, that won't give us happiness, right?
And you're looking for the happiness in the objects. So like as you keep accumulating this, like you are always like you're getting more attached to it. Once you have more attachment, like always you have fear of losing. So the mind is constantly thinking of either like accumulating the wealth and the and then also trying to protect, and like all the time you have insecure feeling.
That is a wonderful point. Krishna will speak about this as well. The difficult thing with anything that is material, when we get it, two things happen. One, we fear losing it. And two, who said that? We want more. We want more. The iPhone 4 wasn't good enough. And now we're up to X. And we're waiting for X1. X Plus. We're just waiting. $1 million isn't enough. We need 2. When we had $1,000 and weren't a credit card bill and all this stuff and not sure we could only eat like basic foods, we thought, wow, just a little bit of money, I'd be okay. Right? But what we see is when we get something, does the mind become, okay, you're all set? No. It wants more. And does it ever end?
Never.
It never ends. It never ends. So if the mind is always wanting more, then by definition it won't be at peace. It won't find peace. When will we find peace? When we're fully satisfied. When all of our desires are satisfied. Right? If you're very hungry, when does that desire for food subside? When you've eaten up to here. Then no more desires. Right? Maybe the next day you'll think, what I'll eat tomorrow. But at least for that day, you're content. So, material desires, we see, they never satisfy. So one problem is when you get it, you're scared of losing it, and you want more. And what happens if you don't have it? You want it. So either way, you're stuck. When you have it, you want more, you're going to lose it. And when you don't have it, you hanker for it.
So I have a question on this.
Yeah.
So for all the various things that you want and you desire for, some are good for you, some are necessary, but then how do you define what is enough?
Got it. Well, so we're going to see how to satisfy this hankering of the mind. Can I take it to that point?
Sure.
Because that's the key. Because listen, if we don't try to satisfy the mind, we'll never find peace and happiness. Right? So, anybody care to guess as to what the fundamental flaw is in our process of trying to satisfy the mind by getting more money and wealth and fame and beauty and all these things we work for day in and day out? Where's the fundamental miss that we've made?
Lack of gratitude.
No, target.
Lack of gratitude?
Target.
Target?
I mean, everyone will have their own target, right?
Everyone has their number.
Yeah.
But when we get to that number, it moves. It's a moving.
I mean, that depends on the person, right? I guess.
I don't know. Since the history of mankind, the target's always moving.
That's been, you've been taught right from the childhood. You need to achieve something, you need to achieve more, and you need to keep trying. Don't lose it. So
Yeah.
that's what. So, and it goes more by age.
And we're not going to stop that. We're going to be extremely motivated to achieve the best of the best.
And I think, we've heard this sometimes, this saying, right? What's your advantage becomes your disadvantage at one point of time.
Yeah.
And I think what starts as a desire is at a point of necessity, then goes beyond a certain point when you don't know, and then starts becoming your disadvantage.
Absolutely. So things that are good end up bad. Your advantages become, how many people have accumulated so much wealth and then you wish, I wish I never had it because it created too many problems. I wish I never had this big house. I wish I never had this, fill in the blank. Because what we thought was an advantage all of a sudden becomes a disadvantage. Exactly to your point. So the fundamental miss is we have forgotten, who am I? All of these desires that we've spoken of so far, they come at the platform of the body. Remember the car and the driver. Right? We're trying to fuel the car. We're trying to polish the car. We're trying to put nice wheels on the car. But all the while, what have we forgotten about?
Our soul.
Yeah, the soul. The person inside. The person inside. So if we try to satisfy the mind by meeting the needs of the body, we're never going to find and satisfy the needs of the soul. So the peaceful mind, it must be coming from a different platform. Right? So at the end of this paragraph, this session, they talked about some different ways to control the mind. Right? So we see these physical methods through yoga and pranayama and dieting and celibacy. What is the drawback of this process of physical control of the mind?
It's temporary.
Temporary. It's February 28th. How many New Year's resolutions have been broken? We forgot them already. So long ago. It's temporary. It's very difficult to control. We can do it for some time. We can make some progress in it. But it's not long lasting. And there's a reason. When I say, okay, I'm no longer going to eat cookies, what's the problem?
You like cookies?
I like cookies. The taste for cookies doesn't go away. The desire for cookies doesn't go away. And in fact, when I stop eating them, what happens to that desire? It increases. Which is why most people, we see the yo-yo dieting. Just picking food as an example. And you end up typically gaining more weight than when you drop. Why? Because that desire goes stronger. Right? So these physical processes and even these mental processes, the challenge is simple. How to let go of these desires for wealth and fame and beauty and strength, these things that give us this tornado in the mind, how can we give them up? Can we? If you have a $5 bill in your hand, and I say, give me that $5 bill, you're going to ask me what question back?
What are you going to give me?
What do I get in return? So how will you determine whether you will give me that $5 bill or not? Based on what formula?
If it's a good trade.
If it's a good trade. And how would you define a good trade?
That's my opinion.
Profitable.
But your opinion is based on?
What will I
Profit. Whatever I'm getting back, is it worth more than the $5? So if I offer you a $10 bill, will you give me your $5 bill? Anybody will hesitate? No. Why? Because we're trading something of higher value for something of lower value. So that's a very easy equation. So Krishna is going to explain to us in the second chapter that to control the mind, we have to develop good desires in the mind. We're not going to stop the mind. This idea of pulling out a plug and just emptying out the mind isn't going to work. Yeah, we may try to do it for short periods of time. But even in that process where we try to, through intense meditative processes or some austerity, we're not going to lose the desire for it. And so we're like a spring. You may hold it down for some time, but as soon as you let go, it's going to recoil again. Similarly, the mind, you may try to hold it down for some time, but it's not going to last unless you find a better formula. So, the Lord says that if you exchange these ideas, these desires, for things that have more value, the higher taste, then controlling the mind becomes very easy. How difficult was it to exchange the $5 bill for the $10 bill? Anybody had to do much analysis? Any forecasting? Any discounted cash flow models? No. You just make the change. It's very easy.
We'll think of what is the catch.
Well, that is our fickle mind. Yes. Right. So when we begin to practice the spiritual processes, then we are going to experience these higher tastes, these things that yield a more peaceful mind. Because everything spiritual is completely a reflection or inverted reflection of material. If you ever look at letters in a mirror, right, it's completely backwards, right? Well, this material world is like looking into the pond of a lake. When you look into the pond of a lake, Krishna will explain this in the beginning of the 15th chapter, that the trees, they look upside down, right? Because you're seeing the reflection. So he uses this analogy to see whatever we see in this material world is actually a reflection of the spiritual world. So just like the desires, whether it's wealth, fame, beauty, you put it whatever it is, it never satisfies. Spiritual desires, they fully satisfy. They leave one fully satiated. They leave one completely content. They have no fear of losing it. Why? Because it's eternal. My spiritual bank account is eternal. Whatever I do in my spiritual process is my eternal credit. My Bank of America bank account is temporary. This desires, when we bring them to spiritual desires, it leaves us fully content and happy. And so how do we experience spiritual desires? What are spiritual desires?
Situating the soul.
Situating the soul in relationship to God. That's our natural state. Remember that fish out of water. That fish out of water is flickering. It's unstable. No matter what you give it, it's unstable. Because it's not in its natural environment. Our mind, when it's disconnected from the Lord, no matter what we do, it's going to be unstable. Maybe relatively different degrees of instability, but it'll be unstable. But as soon as that fish is returned to water, it becomes very peaceful again. And similarly, as soon as we reconnect our soul back with the Supreme Soul, it becomes very peaceful. So the spiritual processes to control the mind are the most potent. Because we're not going through artificial limitations. We're not giving up something, but then increasing the desire. And how do we know that'll work? It's by experience. As we begin to practice different spiritual activities, we'll see, wow, this is neat. This is kind of cool, or whatever adjective you want to use. And that'll propel you to do a little more. And slowly, you'll start to change. You'll start to exchange $5 bill activities for $10 bill activities. You say, you know what, I thought I was getting happiness out of this, but I'm getting more happiness out of my chanting, out of discussing like this, experiencing different relationships with the Lord. I'm going to do more. And so by a natural process versus an artificial or difficult process, one can bring the mind in control. And you may recall in the seminar I said, write down 5 things you want to improve and put it into an envelope. And then open it up after 30 days or 3 months of chanting. Because the mind will become so much more pacified, so much more peaceful. So, I wanted to explain this drawing a little bit. This is a very famous illustration. And the horses, they are like senses. The senses, the eyes, the ears, the mouth, the nose, and touch. So you know, whatever I see, it creates desires in the mind. Right? Whatever I hear, it creates desires in the mind. Whatever I smell, whatever I touch. Right? So the senses are like the gateways, the access points into the mind. Right? So the horses are like the senses, and the ropes, or we call the reins, those are like that's like the mind. And who's holding the reins, the ropes? The driver. That is the intelligence. And behind the driver is seated the soul, the passenger. The passenger. So we can imagine we're driving down a road with an embankment, and each side is a ditch. So how do we ensure the safe journey of that soul, of that passenger? Do we want to tell the horses, don't do anything, stop? No. Do we want to tell the reins, the ropes, don't move? No. We want the driver with great expertise to channel, to utilize the horses and the ropes to move the chariot forward. So similarly, what does an intelligent person do? They use their senses and the mind for the safe journey of the soul. So spirituality is not about shutting off the senses. Okay, I'm not going to see anything, I'm not going to hear anything, I'm not going to... No. Who wants to sign up for that program? Nobody. That would be foolish. Spirituality is not about trying to quiet the mind or tell the mind to stop. That's like telling a 2-year-old child, particularly boys, father of 2 boys, I speak from experience, you just sit quietly. How well does that work? Very well? You have a young boy. It works well? So when a 2-year-old child is doing something destructive, what do? We try to engage them in something productive. Just telling them to sit and stop isn't going to work. Telling the mind to stop isn't going to work. Instead, we have to engage the mind. Engage it in something productive. What is productive for us? That's a trick. What is productive for us? Spiritual activities. Why? Because I am spirit soul. Where is my happiness going to come from? My soul. So all the productive activities relate to the soul. So when the driver lets go of the ropes, what happens to the passenger and the chariot? Is it in a very safe situation? Huh?
No, it goes out of control.
It goes out of control. This is like when the mind overtakes the intelligence. Any of us have ever done something that we knew we shouldn't have done, but we still did it? I guess I'm the only one raising my hand. I'll put both hands up. We've all done it. That is the mind overtaking the intelligence. Right? We knew it was wrong, but this intelligence wasn't strong enough to hold us back. And sometimes even the senses will overtake the mind. That's like the horses getting loose of the ropes and just going in all kinds of directions. It's a very dangerous situation. So the safe journey includes the senses being used, but being used in a productive means. Being controlled by the mind, and the mind being controlled by the intelligence. So the driver needs to be very strong to hold on to those ropes, right? You have to be strong to hold on to those ropes. Because if they're weak, those ropes will slip from the hands. So, through spiritual understanding, we will strengthen the intelligence to know, I am spirit soul. I'm not this body. Yes, this desire is coming for X, Y, and Z, but that's not as important as these other desires that I'm trying to cultivate. But it takes some intelligence. And how do we strengthen the intelligence? By acquiring knowledge through the process of chanting, by honoring prasadam, the A, B, C's, and D's. You had a question?
Yeah, and maybe I missed this. What is the difference between mind and intellect?
Yeah, okay. So the difference between the mind and intelligence. So the mind are all these desires, and they pop up. And the intelligence is the decision maker. What to do. And the intelligence sometimes goes with what the mind desires, and sometimes the intelligence goes with what it knows is right and wrong. So the mind doesn't have independent ability. It has just, again, it's data. Something has to process that data. Right? So, by the process of chanting, what are we doing? We say we are purifying the mind. What does it mean to purify the mind? It means we're putting good desires into the mind. We're not emptying the mind. I'll give an example. And I use this example, I may come back to it a lot. Imagine your mind is like a cup. And you've walked through a dense jungle. And then you come through the clearing and you're on a beautiful beach. And on this beautiful beach, you see these beautiful blue waters. And you take this cup and you fill it up with this water. And then you take a sip of it and you realize it's salty. That's kind of the material world. It looks good. Sounds good on paper. But every taste, day after day, is salty. But because I worked so hard to accumulate this water in a cup, I don't want to dump it out. I can't do it. I can't dump it out. Just like I can't dump these different activities that I have now. And you may recall back, I said spirituality is about an additive process, not a subtractive process. I don't want to dump it out. So how do I exchange salty water with something good? I take a bottle of honey, very sweet nectarian. And if I start to pour honey into that glass, what happens?
It sweetens the salt water.
It sweetens the salt water, but the honey goes to the bottom. And what happens to the water? It comes out. And what happens if I squeeze more honey? And I keep pouring more and more? Eventually what happens? It's filled with honey. How did I exchange my cup from salt water to honey? By adding. Similarly, all these thoughts and desires in our mind. It is said on average we have 60,000 thoughts per day. Over 77% of them are of what we call unproductive. That's putting it lightly. Others would say bad etiquette. I don't know how you could put it. Not very good thoughts. 77%. 95% of them, these are all facts from psychologists, that 95% of them repeat day after day. So how are we going to get rid of all of them? How did we get rid of that water? By adding honey. By the process of chanting, by the process of reading, by experiencing, the different activities of the Lord, hearing, associating, we will start to add productive thoughts to our mind. And slowly but surely the mind will become controlled. And this is in the 6th chapter, 7th, 8th, and 9th verses. And the Lord says, here is the result of a conquered mind. For one who has conquered the mind, super soul is already reached. He has attained tranquility. To such a man, happiness, distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. How many of us would like to be strong enough to be happy whether it's 68 degrees or 12 degrees? Whether somebody is honoring us or dishonoring us. It takes a strong person to have a... 8th verse. A person who is said to be established in self-realization is called a yogi when he is fully satisfied by virtue of acquired knowledge and realization. Such a person is situated in transcendence and is self-controlled. He sees everything, whether it be pebbles, stone, or gold, as the same. How great would it be? Whether I'm a billionaire or have a few dollars, I'm content. I'm happy. A nice position to be in. A person is considered still further advanced when he regards honest well-wishers, affectionate benefactors, the neutral, mediators, the envious, friends and enemies, the pious and sinners, all with an equal mind. Think about if a controlled mind, we were not judgmental. Think about society that exists where people view everyone equally. How much conflict there would be. How much conflict there would be. If you could see your enemies with an equal mind as your well-wishers. Anybody would like to have this type of strength to move through society? Would we find happiness in every step of the way? Anybody thinks this is difficult? You know what Arjuna said? He said, it is difficult to control the mind. He said it's easier to capture the wind than it is to capture the mind. It's exactly the verse he uses in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. He says, I have a better chance of catching the wind than I do catching my mind. So Krishna responds. He says, yes, this is the 35th verse. O almighty armed son of Kunti, that is Arjuna. It is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind. But it is possible by suitable practice and by detachment. What is the practice? A, B, C, and D. That is the practice. And detachment from what? I am this body. And how are we going to detach? When am I going to detach from that $5 bill? When I can attach to something better. There is nothing better we can attach to, being spirit soul as part and parcel of the Lord, than our spiritual activities. So the process of controlling the mind is not by trying to give it more money, more wealth, more fame, more beauty, eating nicely, sleeping nicely, mating nicely, defending nicely. We have been trying for generations and generations, thousands of years. We said it very early on, society has advanced from the measures we talk about, technology and goods and wealth and all of these. But the mind is not. The mind is, we see it right in front of us. But we think, you know what? No, I'll do it. I'll conquer it. I'll figure it out. No one's done it before. The Lord is giving us the answers. It is through a spiritually based life that one finds great peace and happiness. And that is why I made that guarantee that if you write down these things, because by the practice of spirituality for some time, you're going to start to add some of that honey into the cup of our mind. And you will find tangible results of this peace, this ability to not be disturbed, the ups and downs. It doesn't mean, let me be very, very clear, a controlled mind doesn't mean we become emotionless. Doesn't mean we become stone-like and we don't have love and compassion. What it means is we don't have these volatile ups and downs. And someone said it earlier, a controlled mind allows us to see things more clearly. So this controlled mind will no longer disturb our ability to see things as we are, as spirit soul, on this journey back to our relationship with God. So that is this art of mind control. There's a lot more we're going to discuss on this. Like I said, almost whole 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita is predicated on this art of mind control. So, do you have any questions or comments before we practice one most potent way of mind control, which is we're going to do some mantra meditation today?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
More of a comment than a question.
Yeah.
So through chanting, right? When you do it for, let's say, 10 minutes or 12 minutes in a day, you want to ideally do it in an environment where you have least amount of distractions. I have noticed that it almost is so demoralizing in the end that you believe that you just cannot control the thoughts that are coming in your mind. And I'm telling you from practice, right?
Yeah.
It's exactly like those horses, right? It's 12 minutes. You know? You think 12 minutes is nothing in a day. But I'm not demoralized by it, but I think it is very demoralizing. Toward the end, you realize that you can't, you know?
Yeah, your point is even for 12 minutes I can't control the mind. Actually, we can't even control it for 12 seconds. Even 1 second. Any of you are golfers? You play golf, right? Okay, so I used to play a lot of golf. You know how demoralizing that can be. You can swing as hard as you can and the ball goes 1 inch. Or it goes that way and you want to go this way. And it's one of the most frustrating games. Why? Because you're just trying to hit this simple ball into a simple hole and it's so easy. It's frustrating. It's very frustrating. Because it doesn't work. But how do you get good at it? How are we going to get to be able to control the mind through chanting? More chanting. When you went on the tennis court and the first time you hit the ball, it went everywhere but over the net. In best case, it went into the net. Worst case, it hit the guy next to you. But what do you do to get better? You keep doing it. You know, the first time you played the violin, people ran for cover. But what do? You keep practicing. So similarly, in chanting, it's extremely natural. The mind's going to go everywhere. It's okay. Just keep practicing. And through that practice, it will become. But it's a stark realization, which I think was more your point, that when you try to control the mind, you realize how hard it is and almost impossible it is. But it is possible, and it will happen through these practices. And it's so potent. Just a little bit a day can bring great peace of mind. I mean, people who began chanting, they speak about, it's almost like instant, that sort of uplifting feeling, and it almost leads them to want to do more. We all have our own experience.
So then I just want to ask a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So what do you want to do when you're chanting?
What do you want to do? Oh, very nice.
Right?
Very nice. Shall we start? And then we'll discuss that. And then we'll ask. So you can hand out some beads to anyone who doesn't have. So, because I'm going to talk about what to do while we're chanting and what the potency of chanting are. So, when we're chanting, first of all, what are we doing? We are calling out the names of the Lord. And we are connecting again the soul with the super soul, with the Supreme Lord. And because it's a spiritual process, we remember that chanting the names of the Lord is non-different from being directly with the Lord. I gave that example of saying, water, water, water will not quench my thirst. Because water and the object are distinct. But the Lord and His names are equally potent. There's no difference between the Lord and His names. And one pastime I'll narrate quickly is some of you are familiar with the Ramayana. And in the Ramayana, we know there's a pastime when Lord Ram was seeing that everyone, they were throwing a stone in the water and it was floating, right? And what were they writing on the stone? Ram, Ram, right? So by the potency of the name Ram, Ram, the stones were floating. So Lord Ram himself came and he thought, if they're writing my name and the stones are floating, what's going to happen when I myself put a stone? What miracle will happen? And so he picked up one stone and he put in the water. And what happened? It sunk. And he took another stone and he threw it. What's going on? And this devotee came. He said, Ram, you don't know. Your names are even more potent than you yourself. You didn't write Ram, Ram on the stone, and thus it sunk. This is how potent the names are. They're even, in some ways, more potent than the Lord Himself. Now that's hard for us to conceptualize. But that's why the effect occurs. Because to utter the names of the Lord is no ordinary accomplishment. It is a great opportunity. And every time we utter the names of the Lord, we put a deposit into our spiritual bank account. And that deposit can never be wiped out. No need for any federal insurance. It is fully protected by the Supreme Protector, the Supreme Lord. So when we are chanting, our goal is to remember the Lord. Remember the relationship with the Lord. So some tips and processes for chanting. We want to speak out loud. Why? Because when I speak, I'm engaging the tongue. I am also engaging the ears. So now 2 of my 5 senses are engaged. Why do we chant on japa beads? Because now I'm engaging the sense of touch. 3 of those horses are now engaged. So the better the chance that the mind will also stay focused. Then we, in an ideal world, you can chant in front of a Bhagavad Gita, or you see a picture of the Lord, something that will remind us of the Lord. And then we will try to see the Lord. And if you smell, you can light an incense or something, but the more senses we engage. And so the most powerful way to control our mind in chanting is to hear each word. So just focusing on speaking and hearing, it creates a loop. And that loop controls the mind. Actually, the mind cannot multitask. We think the mind can do two things at once. I can text and drive. It's not multitasking. It is. It's picking one, and it's flickering back and forth between two activities to give the appearance of multitasking, but there's no such thing as multitasking. The mind is a single lane processor. It can only process one thing at a time, but it can flip back and forth very fast. Just like if I move this thing very, very fast, it looks like it's not moving. Right? So similarly, that's what the mind does. So by hearing the words of the Lord and by speaking, you're actually automatically controlling the mind. So all we want to do is whenever the mind goes off, go back to hearing the 16 words. Mind goes off, bring it back. Mind goes off, bring it back. And don't worry. After a while, the bringing it back will happen less and less, and eventually you'll hit the ball right down the middle of the fairway. Okay? So when we chant, we'll chant one mantra, and then we'll move on the beads, like this. Okay? And then we'll chant together the mantra, and then we'll keep moving as we chant together, like this. And so if you go all the way around once, that's 108 times, and we call that one round or one japa. Okay? So you're going to go like this. We're just going to go all the way around, and it's 108 times. Now in the beginning, you don't have to worry so much about this, but in time, you can work to try to keep your index finger off the beads. But again, in the more point is focusing the mind, and in time you can try to keep this finger off. There's some reasons for it we'll discuss later. So there's no improper or ineffective or bad. There's no time, place, or circumstance in which we cannot chant. There's no qualification in terms of I need to have this purity, that. There's no restrictions on chanting. It is so potent. It can overcome all other things. So don't worry about whether you're doing it right, wrong, or indifferent. It is through the practice. And as we do it together, you'll get better and you'll perfect it. Okay? So before we chant, you may have heard this mantra a few times. It's also mantra 3 on your song sheet. We'll chant this mantra and you can repeat it after me. And this gives us some blessings to have access in chanting.